I stared at the bank statement on my phone, my hands trembling as I zoomed in on the transaction. $50,000 transferred to Dr. Muhammad Watson's private account, the same doctor Danny had specially selected for my pregnancy care. The same doctor who'd been oddly insistent about handling all my prenatal testing personally. My name is Bianca, and I've spent the last 5 years of my life married to a man who treats me like a possession rather than a partner. The irony? I used to think being a millionaire's wife would feel like living in a fairy tale. Instead, it feels like being trapped in a gilded cage, with Danny holding all the keys. Mrs. Peters, would you like another cup of tea? Our housekeeper, Maria, stood in the doorway of my study, concern etched on her face. I quickly locked my phone screen. No thank you, Maria, but could you let me know when my husband returns? She nodded and left, her footsteps fading down the marble hallway. I waited until I was sure she was gone before pulling up my message thread with Laurel. Found something. Need to talk. Can you meet? I typed, then deleted it. Danny monitored my phone. Instead, I sent, haven't seen you in ages. Lunch at the Garden Cafe tomorrow? Her response came quickly. Miss you too. 12:30 work? I smiled, remembering why Laurel had been my best friend since college. She always knew when something was wrong, even through innocent-looking text messages. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the house, followed by Danny's voice barking orders at someone, probably his assistant. I quickly closed all banking apps and opened my pregnancy journal instead. There's my beautiful wife, Danny announced, striding into the study. He leaned down to kiss my cheek, his expensive cologne overwhelming my sensitive nose. How are you feeling? Did you take your vitamins? Yes, Danny. Dr. Watson prescribed an extra supplement today, remember? His eyes flickered with something. Satisfaction? Before he masked it with concern. Good. We need to take extra care of you and our little heir. He placed his hand possessively on my still flat stomach. Speaking of which, Dr. Watson called. He wants to do some additional genetic testing next week. I forced myself to smile, though my heart was racing. More tests? Is something wrong? No, just being thorough. You know how important this baby is to me, to us. He straightened his tie. I've already scheduled it for Tuesday at 2 p.m. I'll have James drive you. Of course he would. Heaven forbid I drive myself anywhere these days. Actually, I was thinking of having Laurel take me. We're having lunch tomorrow and… Laurel? His tone sharpened. I thought we agreed you needed to distance yourself from her. She's a bit unstable since her divorce. She's my friend, Danny. And I'm your husband. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. James will drive you. End of discussion. Later that night, after Danny had fallen asleep, I lay awake, my mind racing. The bank transfer, the extra tests, Danny's insistence on controlling every aspect of my pregnancy. It all pointed to something sinister. I thought about the way he'd been obsessing over this baby, constantly talking about his heir, questioning me about my activities before we met. My phone lit up with a notification, an email from our bank about another transfer, this time to an offshore account I didn't recognize. I quickly took screenshots, my hands shaking as I saved them to a secure cloud drive Danny didn't know about. The baby kicked, as if sensing my distress. I placed my hand on my stomach, whispering, "Don't worry, little one. Mommy's gonna figure this out. Tomorrow, I would tell Laurel everything. About the money, the controlling behavior, my suspicions about the DNA testing. Danny might think he had me trapped, but he'd forgotten something crucial about caged birds. They're always looking for a way to fly free." I glanced at my sleeping husband, his face peaceful in repose, and felt a chill run down my spine. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't afraid of his anger or his control. I was afraid of what he was capable of doing to ensure this baby was his heir. Well, two could play at that game. Danny might be a master of manipulation, but he'd never seen me fight back. Not yet. I touched my stomach again, making a silent promise to my child. Whatever game Danny was playing, whatever he was trying to hide, I would find out. And when I did, he'd learn that he wasn't the only one who could be dangerous when protecting what matters most. The garden cafe was busy enough that no one would notice us, but quiet enough that we could talk without being overheard. I watched Laurel's face change as I slid my phone across the table, showing her the bank statements. $50,000, she whispered, her fork freezing halfway to her mouth. To your doctor? And that's just the first payment. I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. There's another 100,000 in an offshore account. Danny thinks I don't know about it, but I've been tracking his transactions for months. Laurel put down her fork and grabbed my hand. Bianca, honey, what exactly do you think is happening here? I think... I paused as our waiter approached. We both smiled politely until he refilled our water glasses and left. I think Danny's trying to manipulate the DNA test results. He's been obsessing about the baby being his heir, questioning me about my past relationships. Last week, he even asked if I'd ever considered sperm donation before we met. That controlling bastard. Laurel's grip tightened on my hand. But why would he think... Because the baby might not be his. The words came out in a rush. Remember that business trip to Tokyo he took last year, when I found out he'd actually been in Miami with his ex? Laurel's eyes widened. The revenge weekend? I nodded. With Jake, my old college boyfriend. It was stupid and petty, but Danny deserved it. Laurel finished. So now you think he suspects something? He doesn't just suspect, he knows. I pulled up another email on my phone. Look at this. Dr. Watson's been ordering extra tests, specific genetic markers. Danny's trying to prove paternity before the baby's born, but he wants to control the results. Laurel was already pulling out her own phone. We need help, professional help. She started typing. I know someone, Keith. He's a lawyer who specializes in family law and corporate fraud. He helped me during my divorce. Danny will know if I meet with a lawyer. He tracks everything. Not if we're smart about it. Laurel showed me her phone. She'd pulled up a spa website. The Serenity Day Spa. Keith's office is right next door. We'll book spa treatments as cover. Danny can track that all he wants. My heart was racing. You really think Keith can help? He's the best, and he hates entitled rich men who think they can buy their way out of anything. Laurel paused, her expression serious. But Bianca, we need to be careful. If Danny's willing to bribe doctors and falsify medical records... I know. I rubbed my growing belly. That's why I need to be sure about everything. Laurel's phone buzzed. She read the message and smiled. Keith can see us tomorrow at 2 p.m. during your prenatal massage. We spent the next hour planning, making sure every detail was covered. As we were leaving, Laurel grabbed my arm. Wait, there's something else you should know. I did some digging after your text last night. She pulled up a news article on her phone. Dr. Watson has a history. 3 years ago, he was involved in a paternity scandal with another wealthy client. The case was suddenly dropped, and he bought a vacation home in the Caymans a month later. My hands started shaking. He's done this before, which means he'll do it again. Laurel's voice hardened, but this time, we'll be ready. The next day, I told Danny I was going for a prenatal massage. He insisted on having James drive me, of course. I waited until James was distracted by a phone call before slipping out the spa's back entrance and into Keith's office. Keith was nothing like I expected. Instead of a stuffy lawyer, I found a man in jeans and a casual blazer, with kind eyes and a determined set to his jaw. Mrs. Peters, he said, gesturing to a chair. Laurel's told me about your situation. Before we continue, I need you to understand something. What you're suggesting, proving medical fraud and paternity test manipulation, it's dangerous territory. I understand. Do you? He leaned forward. Because once we start this, there's no going back. Your husband sounds like a man who's used to getting his way. He won't take this lying down. I met his gaze steadily. Neither will I. Keith nodded, satisfied. Then let's talk about getting you a real DNA test. I know someone, a private investigator named Madeline. She's also a certified lab technician. She can help us get accurate results without your husband's knowledge. As Keith outlined the plan, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Danny thought he had everything under control, but his perfect plan had one fatal flaw. He'd underestimated me, and that would be his biggest mistake. Madeline's lab didn't look like much from the outside, just another medical office in a strip mall on the outskirts of town. But as soon as we stepped inside, I could tell this was no ordinary facility. The equipment was state-of-the-art, and security cameras monitored every angle. The blood draw will only take a minute, Madeline said, snapping on latex gloves. Her no-nonsense attitude was oddly comforting. Keith filled me in on your situation. Don't worry, we'll have definitive results within 48 hours. Laurel squeezed my hand as Madeline drew the blood. And Danny won't be able to trace this? Impossible. Madeline labeled the vial with a code number instead of my name. We're not even using your insurance. As far as the world is concerned, this test never happened. Keith cleared his throat from where he stood by the door. We should discuss what happens next. Once we have the results, they're going to show Jake is the father. I interrupted. I already know that. The room fell silent. Madeline carefully packed away the blood sample while Keith and Laurel exchanged glances. How can you be so sure? Keith asked. Because Danny and I took a deep breath. We were having fertility issues. For 2 years before the Tokyo trip, we tried everything. Multiple doctors all said the same thing. Danny's sperm count was too low for natural conception. That's why he's so obsessed with this baby. He knows it can't be his. Jesus, Laurel whispered. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was ashamed. Not of the fertility issues, but of how I handled it. Danny became obsessed with having an heir. He started tracking my cycle, scheduling our intimacy like business meetings. When I found out about his trip to Miami, something in me just snapped. Keith was already taking notes. This changes things. If we can prove he knew about his fertility issues, a knock at the door made us all jump. Madeline checked the security camera and relaxed. It's just my assistant with the paperwork. While Madeline handled the documentation, Keith pulled up something on his tablet. Look at this. I've been investigating Dr. Watson's previous cases. 3 years ago, he helped another wealthy client alter paternity results. The mother in that case mysteriously disappeared to Europe with a very generous settlement. My blood ran cold. You think Danny would... I think Danny is a man who spent his entire life controlling outcomes, Keith said firmly. When the results come back, we need to be ready. I've already started preparing divorce papers and documentation for a restraining order. But we still need proof of the bribery, Laurel pointed out. The bank transfers aren't enough on their own. Madeline rejoined us, her expression thoughtful. What about Dr. Watson himself? In my experience, men like that keep records. Insurance, you might say. He'd never talk to me, I said. He's too afraid of Danny. Maybe he should be more afraid of us. Keith's voice had an edge to it. I've got enough evidence of his previous fraud to end his medical career. Sometimes the threat of losing everything is more persuasive than money. My phone buzzed. A text from Danny. Where are you? James says your massage ended 30 minutes ago. I need to go, I said, standing quickly. He's getting suspicious. Wait. Madeline handed me a business card with a number written on the back. This is my private line. When the results come in, I'll text you a code word. Butterfly, if it confirms what you suspect. Moonlight, if by some chance we're wrong. As James drove me home, I thought about how much had changed in just a few hours. I had a team now, a plan, evidence building. Danny was waiting in the foyer when I arrived. How was your massage, darling? Wonderful, I smiled, touching my belly. The baby was really active today. Excellent. He kissed my cheek. Dr. Watson called. He wants to do the special testing tomorrow instead of next week. I've cleared my schedule to accompany you. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my expression neutral. Of course. Whatever you think is best. That night, as I lay in bed listening to Danny's steady breathing, my phone lit up with a text. One word, butterfly. I deleted the message immediately, my hands shaking. Now I knew for certain the baby wasn't Danny's. But more importantly, I had proof he was trying to manipulate the truth. Tomorrow, he would take me to Dr. Watson's office, thinking he had everything under control. But for the first time since I'd discovered his betrayal, I felt powerful. Because while Danny was busy orchestrating his elaborate deception, he had no idea I was orchestrating something too. His downfall. Dr. Watson's hands trembled slightly as he prepared the amniocentesis needle. Danny sat beside me, his fingers drumming against the armrest of his chair, watching every move like a hawk. This will just take a moment, Mrs. Peters, Dr. Watson said, his voice carefully professional. A small pinch, that's all. I focused on keeping my breathing steady, playing the role of the trusting patient. Will we get the results today? The comprehensive genetic analysis takes time. Danny answered before Dr. Watson could speak. But it's worth the wait, isn't it, darling? To ensure everything is perfect. The needle slid in and I winced, more from Danny's words than the pain. Dr. Watson collected the sample with practiced efficiency, though I noticed a bead of sweat on his forehead. I'll personally oversee the testing, he assured Danny. We should have results within the week. On the drive home, Danny was unusually talkative, laying out plans for the nursery, discussing private schools, mapping out our child's entire future. I nodded at all the right moments, playing my part perfectly. Oh, I almost forgot, he said casually as we pulled into our driveway. I'm transferring some of our joint accounts to my personal business holdings. Just temporary. Tax purposes, you understand? My heart raced, but I kept my voice level. All of them? Most. He smiled, patting my hand. Don't worry your pretty head about it. I'll handle everything. The moment I was alone, I texted Keith. He's moving the money. Keith's response came quickly. Already on it. Meeting tomorrow? Same cover? I confirmed the appointment, then deleted our conversation. Just in time. Danny walked into the bedroom, loosening his tie. I've been thinking, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Maybe you should take a break from those spa treatments. Dr. Watson mentioned stress isn't good for the baby. But they help me relax, I protested, careful to sound just worried enough. Unless there's another reason you don't want me going? Of course not. He kissed my forehead. I just want what's best for you and our heir. The next day, I met Keith at the fake spa appointment. His office felt like a war room, with documents spread across his desk and Laurel pacing nearby. He's moving fast, Keith said, showing me financial records. 3 accounts already transferred. But look at this. He pointed to a series of transactions. He's been planning this for months, small amounts moving through different shells companies. Can you stop him? I asked. Better. Keith smiled grimly. We can use it against him. These transfers, they're textbook fraud. He's not just hiding money from you. He's hiding it from the IRS. Laurel stopped pacing. What about Dr. Watson? Any progress there? Actually, yes. Keith pulled out his phone, playing a recording. Dr. Watson's voice filled the room, discussing special arrangements with Danny. The quality wasn't perfect, but the meaning was clear. How did you get this? I whispered. Madeline has her ways. Keith tucked the phone away. But we need more. Direct evidence of the test manipulation. I might have an idea. Laurel interjected. Dr. Watson has a nurse, Sarah. She contacted me after seeing my name in the visitor logs. Apparently, she's been keeping her own records of his irregular practices. A plan started forming in my mind. Can she get access to the actual test results before Danny has them altered? Better than that, Laurel said. She's willing to testify. She's tired of being part of his schemes. Keith was already making notes. This is good, really good. But Bianca, you need to be careful. Danny's getting desperate. The money transfers, rushing the tests. He's preparing for something. My phone buzzed. A text from Danny. Surprise inspection at the office. Had to move some meetings. Don't wait up. I showed them the message. He's lying. He never has surprise inspections. Let me have someone follow him, Keith offered, just to be safe. That evening, I received photos from Keith's investigator. Danny wasn't at his office. He was at a private airfield, talking to someone next to a small plane. The next photo made my blood freeze. He was holding what looked like passports. He's planning to run, I realized, my hands shaking as I called Keith. With the baby. We need to move faster, Keith agreed. I'll have the papers ready by morning. But Bianca, be careful tonight. Don't let him suspect anything. I ended the call and deleted everything, just as I heard Danny's key in the door. Game, face on. I had to keep playing the obedient wife for just a little longer. But as I watched Danny walk in, smiling that confident smile, I made a silent promise. He wasn't going to win this game. Not this time. The last person I expected to see at my doorstep was my sister Nora. We hadn't spoken since my wedding to Danny 5 years ago. He'd made sure of that. Yet here she was, looking nervous but determined. Your neighbor called me, she said before I could speak. Mrs. Rodriguez, she's worried about you. I glanced around quickly, then pulled her inside. Danny's at a business lunch. We have maybe an hour. Nora followed me to the kitchen, her eyes taking in the expensive decor. Nice prison you've got here. Nora, no, let me finish. She grabbed my hands. Mrs. Rodriguez said you've been looking scared lately, that men in suits have been watching the house. What's going on, Bianca? The baby kicked, and suddenly I was crying, the weight of everything crashing down. Nora wrapped her arms around me, just like when we were kids. He's trying to take my baby. I whispered. He's going to run with my baby. Like hell he is. Nora's voice was steel. Tell me everything. So I did. The affair, the pregnancy, the DNA tests, the fraud, it all spilled out. Nora listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. That's why he turned us against each other, she said finally. He knew I'd see through him. I'm sorry I didn't believe you back then. Hey, she squeezed my hand. You weren't ready to see it, but you are now, and you're not alone anymore. My phone buzzed, a text from Laurel. Emergency, Keith's office, now. I have to go, I said, showing Nora the message. Danny thinks I'm at a doctor's appointment. I'm coming with you. Nora, try and stop me. She grabbed her purse. I've got 5 years of big sister protection to make up for. At Keith's office, we found Laurel and Madeline already there. Keith was pacing, looking more agitated than I'd ever seen him. We have a problem, he said without preamble. Danny's been moving more than money. Look at this. He showed us documents on his tablet. Property records, flight manifests, bank transfers. He's got a house in a non-extradition country, Keith explained. Private jet on standby. And this morning, he filed for emergency sole custody of the baby, citing concerns about your mental health. He what? Nora stood up so fast, her chair fell over. It gets worse, Madeline added. Dr. Watson's nurse contacted me. Danny's pushed up the timeline. He wants the falsified test results by tomorrow. Can't we stop him? I asked. We have proof of the fraud. We do, Keith agreed. But he's moving faster than we anticipated. If he gets those false results, combined with the mental health claims, he could take the baby as soon as it's born, Laurel finished. Nora started pacing. So we move faster. You said you have proof? Use it now. It's not that simple, Keith started, but Nora cut him off. Actually, it is. She pulled out her phone. I work for the city newspaper. Give me the proof and I'll have the story ready to run. Once it's public, he can't hide. That's too dangerous, I protested. More dangerous than letting him steal your baby, Nora challenged. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Keith was nodding slowly. She's right. Danny's counting on our caution. He's not expecting us to go nuclear. If we do this, Madeline said, we need to do it right. Maximum impact. The charity gala, Laurel suddenly exclaimed. It's this weekend. Everyone who's anyone will be there. Including Dr. Watson, I added, remembering the invitation. Danny insisted we all attend. Keith's expression turned calculating. Perfect. Public venue, witnesses, press. We could end this in one night. But we have to be careful, Madeline warned. Danny's desperate. Desperate men are dangerous. Nora grabbed my hand. That's why she won't be alone. I'm not leaving my sister again. As they planned, I felt something shift inside me. Fear giving way to determination. Danny had spent years isolating me, making me doubt myself. But he'd never counted on this, on family and friends coming together, on the strength that comes from not being alone. My phone buzzed again. Danny, where are you? James says you left the doctor's office an hour ago. Shopping for the gala, I texted back. Lost track of time, heading home now. Perfect timing, Keith said, checking his watch. We have 3 days to prepare. Everyone knows their roles? We all nodded. The plan was set. In 3 days, at the biggest social event of the season, Danny's carefully constructed world would come crashing down. As Nora drove me home, she glanced over. Are you scared? Yes, I admitted. But not of him. Not anymore. Dr. Watson's private office was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd sold their integrity, all mahogany and pretense. He jumped when I walked in unannounced, nearly spilling his coffee. Mrs. Peters, I wasn't expecting... Let's skip the pleasantries, I said, closing the door behind me. We both know why I'm here. His hand shook as he set down his coffee cup. I'm afraid I don't... I pulled out my phone and played the recording Keith had given me. Danny's voice filled the room, discussing price points for falsified results. Dr. Watson's face went pale. Where did you get that? Does it matter? I sat down across from him. What matters is what happens next. He reached for his phone, but I shook my head. Call Danny and the recording goes public, along with evidence of your previous cases. How many other tests have you falsified, doctor? You don't understand, he stammered. Your husband is planning to take my baby and flee the country. I leaned forward. And you're helping him. Dr. Watson slumped in his chair. He'll destroy me. He'll try, but I can protect you. I pulled out Keith's card. This lawyer specializes in witness protection cases. Help us expose Danny, testify about what he asked you to do, and we'll make sure you're safe. And if I refuse, then I release everything. The recordings, the bank transfers, your history of fraud. Your career ends today. His hand trembled as he reached for Keith's card. What do you need? The real test results, all of them. And your testimony at the gala tomorrow night. The charity gala? He looked horrified. Everyone will be there. Exactly. I stood up. Time to decide, doctor. Be Danny's victim or help me stop him. He stared at the card for a long moment. Give me an hour. I'll have everything you need. Outside in the car, Laurel was waiting. Well, he'll help. I buckled my seatbelt. But we need to move fast. He'll warn Danny the moment we leave. Keith's already on it. Laurel pulled away from the curb. Nora's article is ready. The moment Dr. Watson hands over the evidence, it goes live. My phone rang. Danny. Where are you? We need to discuss the gala. Just finishing some errands. I said smoothly. I'll be home soon. Good. Dr. Watson called. Said you stopped by? My heart skipped, but my voice remained steady. Yes, had some questions about the baby. Everything okay? Perfect. His tone was too calm. See you soon, darling. I ended the call, my hands shaking. He knows something's wrong. Doesn't matter. Laurel took a sharp turn. By this time tomorrow, everyone will know everything. Back home, Danny was waiting in his study. Interesting day? He asked, not looking up from his laptop. Just busy with gala preparations. I touched my stomach, feeling the baby kick. You know how these events are. Indeed. He closed his laptop. Dr. Watson seemed quite rattled after your visit. Really? He seemed fine to me. Danny stood walking around his desk. You know what I love about you, Bianca? Your innocence, your trust. He touched my cheek. It would be a shame to lose that. The threat was clear, but I held his gaze. I trust you completely, Danny. Don't you trust me? Of course. His smile didn't reach his eyes. That's why I've arranged a surprise. After the gala tomorrow, we're taking a little trip, just you and me. A trip? A baby moon of sorts. The jet's already prepared. My phone buzzed. A text from Keith. Got everything from Watson. Ready when you are. Sounds wonderful, I said to Danny, slipping my phone away. I can't wait. That night, I lay awake listening to Danny's breathing, knowing he was planning to kidnap me tomorrow. But he didn't know what was coming. Didn't know that Dr. Watson had turned over everything. Proof of the bribes, the real test results, documentation of every illegal act Danny had ordered. My phone lit up with messages from our team. Nora, article ready to go live. Keith, legal documents filed, police on standby. Laurel, security team in place for tomorrow. Madeline, all evidence secured and backed up. One more day, one more act in Danny's play before the curtain fell. He thought tomorrow was his endgame, his chance to take control once and for all. He had no idea it was actually mine. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and false pretenses. Danny kept his hand firmly on my lower back as we worked the room, his smile never wavering as he introduced me to potential investors and business partners. You look beautiful tonight, he whispered, but his fingers dug into my skin. Everyone's watching us. Isn't that the point? I smiled back, spotting Laurel across the room, giving me a subtle nod. Dr. Watson stood near the bar, jumping every time someone approached him. Keith was positioned by the entrance, looking sharp in a tuxedo, speaking quietly into his phone. Nora, press badge displayed prominently, circulated through the crowd with her camera. Ladies and gentlemen, the event coordinator announced, please take your seats. Mr. Peters will be making his address shortly. Danny squeezed my arm. Time for my speech. Wait here. The moment he stepped away, Laurel appeared at my side. Everything's in place. You ready? I nodded, watching Danny climb the steps to the podium. He looked so confident, so sure of his control. Distinguished guests, he began, I'm honored to be here tonight. As many of you know, this charity is close to my heart. Speaking of hearts, he smiled at me. My beautiful wife and I are expecting our first child, our heir. The crowd applauded. I saw Dr. Watson down his drink in one gulp. In fact, Danny continued. I have wonderful news to share. We've just received the genetic testing results confirming a perfectly healthy baby boy. My moment had come. I stood up, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. That's interesting, Danny. Did Dr. Watson give you those results? Danny's smile flickered. Darling, perhaps we should. Because I have the real results right here. I held up my phone. Would you like me to share them? Or should we ask Dr. Watson about the $50,000 you paid him to falsify them? The room erupted in whispers. Danny's face hardened. Bianca, you're obviously overwhelmed. The pregnancy hormones are making me crazy. I walked toward the podium. Like the mental health claims you filed? Or the custody papers? Or maybe we should discuss the private jet you have waiting to kidnap me tonight. Security, Danny snapped, but Keith was faster. Actually, Keith announced, the police are already here, and they're very interested in discussing your offshore accounts and medical fraud. Nora stepped forward, her camera flashing. Mr. Peters, care to comment on the evidence of your attempts to falsify paternity tests or the documented threats against your wife? Danny lunged for me, but two plainclothes officers appeared, blocking his path. This is ridiculous. I'm trying to protect my heir. He's not your heir, Danny. My voice rang clear through the stunned silence. He was never yours. The real DNA results prove it, just like your medical records prove you couldn't father a child naturally. That's why you were so desperate, wasn't it? You lying bitch. He tried to push past the officers. I'll destroy you. No. Dr. Watson's shaky voice cut through the chaos. She's telling the truth. I have proof of everything. The bribes, the falsified records, all of it. The officers moved in, reading Danny his rights as cameras flashed. The crowd watched in shocked silence as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. This isn't over, Danny snarled as they led him away. You're nothing without me. Actually, Keith stepped forward, handing me a folder. She's about to be very wealthy. These divorce papers include evidence of your financial fraud. The DA's very interested in your creative accounting. Laurel appeared at my side, supporting me as my legs trembled. Nora was already typing on her phone, no doubt filing her story. Dr. Watson sat heavily in a nearby chair, looking both relieved and terrified. Mrs. Peters? A police detective approached. We'll need your statement. Of course. I watched as they escorted Danny out, his perfect facade finally shattered. I have everything documented. The ballroom slowly emptied, the charity gala forgotten in the wake of the scandal. Reporters clustered outside, their cameras flashing through the windows. Laurel, Nora, and Keith formed a protective circle around me. You did it, Laurel whispered, hugging me tight. We did it, I corrected her, feeling the baby kick as if in agreement. As we walked out, I caught my reflection in a mirror, standing tall, no longer afraid. Danny had spent years building his house of lies, never realizing I was quietly gathering the evidence to bring it down. The night air felt clean and fresh as we stepped outside. Reporters called my name, cameras flashed, but for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Danny's perfect world had crumbled, and from its ashes, I would build something real, something honest, something mine. The morning sun streamed through my hospital room window as I held my newborn son. Nora sat beside me, gently stroking his tiny hand. He has your nose, she said, smiling, and definitely Jake's eyes. Jake called this morning, I told her. He's giving us space, but he wants to be involved however we're comfortable with. That's surprisingly mature of him. People can surprise you. I adjusted the baby's blanket. Did you see the news? Nora pulled up the article on her phone. Danny took a plea deal. 20 years for fraud, attempted kidnapping, and conspiracy. Dr. Watson got 5 years, but his testimony helped put Danny away. Good. I kissed my son's forehead. We're safe now, little one. A knock at the door made us look up. Laurel entered, followed by Keith, both carrying ridiculous amounts of baby gifts. The media circus outside is insane, Laurel announced, setting down her packages. But Keith's team is keeping them at bay. Speaking of teams, Keith pulled out some papers. The divorce is final. Danny's assets have been frozen, and the court awarded you control of the legitimate businesses. There's something poetic about his heir inheriting everything, just not the way he planned. I don't want his money, I said. No, Keith agreed. But think of what you could do with it. The foundation you talked about, helping other women escape controlling relationships, this could fund it for decades. The baby stirred, making tiny snuffling noises. Laurel immediately reached for him, her eyes soft. Have you decided on a name? She asked. Thomas, I said. It means twin, which he's not, but I like the idea that he carries two stories, the truth and the lie that brought him here. Deep, Nora commented, but I like it. Another knock and Madeline poked her head in. Sorry I'm late. Had to finish processing the last of the evidence for the DA. She joined our growing circle, peering at Thomas. He's perfect. Thank you, I said, looking at each of them. All of you. I couldn't have done this alone. You never had to, Nora replied firmly. My phone buzzed, a message from Danny's lawyer. I handed Thomas to Laurel before reading it. Danny wants to make a deal, I announced. He'll sign away all parental rights if I drop the additional fraud charges. Your call, Keith said. But remember, those charges protect others he might try to hurt in the future. I typed my response. No deal. The truth comes out, all of it. That's my sister, Nora grinned. The Foundation's first initiative, I decided, watching Thomas being passed around my chosen family. A legal fund for women fighting custody battles against wealthy abusers. No one should have to choose between truth and safety. I'll draw up the paperwork, Keith offered. And I'll run the story, Nora added. Show other women they're not alone. Thomas started fussing, and Madeline handed him back to me. He settled immediately, his tiny hand gripping my finger. You know what I learned from all this? I said softly. Danny thought power meant control, over money, over truth, over people. But real power? It's in choosing to be honest, even when it's hard, in asking for help when you need it, and in helping others when you can, Laurel finished. A nurse entered with discharge papers. Ready to go home? More than ready. I signed the forms while Nora packed our things. The car's waiting, Keith said. Your new place is all set up, security system active. As we prepared to leave, I paused in the doorway, looking back at the hospital room. This was where Thomas's story began. Not with Danny's lies or my revenge, but with truth and justice and the family we choose. Coming? Laurel asked, holding the door. Yeah. I adjusted Thomas in my arms. We're ready for whatever's next. Outside, the morning was bright and clear. Reporters called questions from behind the security line, but their voices seemed distant, unimportant. What mattered was right here. My son, my family, our future. Thomas blinked up at me, and I smiled. Welcome to the world, little one. It's not perfect, but it's real. And that's better than perfect any day. We drove away from the hospital, leaving behind Danny's world of carefully constructed facades. Ahead lay something messier but more beautiful. A life built on truth, supported by love, protected by justice. And that was worth fighting for.